Hi, Mr. Loomis. Welcome back for our next unit, which is about the Cold War. This was a very important event in history that lasted for more than 40 years. So in a way, it's wrong to call it an event. It's really more of a collection of many events. So this unit is going to be longer than any of the units we've studied so far. We're going to split this up into 6 lessons. Here in this first lesson, we'll talk about what the Cold War was and why it started. First, let's preview today's topics. We'll describe the split between the United States and the Soviet Union that led these two countries to face off for so long. We'll talk about communism and why Americans were so afraid of it. We'll talk about 2 meetings or conferences that happened during World War II between American and other world leaders. We'll describe the process of decolonization and the creation of the Third World. You've learned before about the League of Nations, but today we'll talk about the United Nations. And finally, we'll learn about a place and idea we call the Iron Curtain. Let's get started by talking about what got everything started, communism. The basic problem in the Cold War was that there were 2 different ideas about how the world should work. It was not a war about religion in the way that Hitler had hated the Jews in the Holocaust. It was not a war about raw materials and power like the Spanish-American War. And it was not really about who was in charge of land like the Indian Wars in the late 1800s. The Cold War was a competition to control how people would live their lives in different parts of the world. The 2 competing ideas were the free market economic system and communism. These 2 ideas were not new. Actually, the struggle between the people who liked these 2 ideas had been going on for years and years. In the United States, we have a free market economic system. This is sometimes called capitalism. In a capitalist system, all of your choices are free, but everything costs money or capital. For example, you are free to choose what to buy and where to buy it and how much to spend. Of course, you have to pay for what you buy. Also, the store owner can choose what to make and sell and how much to charge for what he or she sells. The owners can also decide who to hire to work for them and how much they're willing to pay their workers. No one makes the workers take a job and they can quit if they want to. It is their choice. We call capitalism a free market economy because everyone is free to make whatever choices he or she wants. Notice that in a free market economy, the government does not have to run things. Capitalism may be simple because no one has to plan it, but it's not perfect. Some people will come up with very good ideas, or they work hard and make a lot of money. And some people who are lazy or just have bad luck will end up being poor. In a free market world, there are classes of people. The upper classes own businesses and have control over most of the money, and the middle and lower classes do the work for the upper class. Communism is different in every way. In the 1800s, 2 German thinkers, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, saw how millions of people were having a hard time because they worked every day in factories and only got paid a tiny amount of money. But the factories were owned by a few rich men who had so much money they couldn't even spend it all. Marx and Engels were sure they knew a better, more fair way to run the world. In 1848, they wrote their ideas down into a short book and called it the Communist Manifesto. Marx and Engels thought that the money of the world should be shared by the workers who make that wealth possible. Farmers would share the money earned from the food they grew. Factory workers would get some of the money earned from the goods they made. Businesses would have no owners, only workers. Marx and Engels said that if their ideas were put into practice, no one would be poor. Everyone who wanted a job and was willing to work could have a job. The things and the food that the people produced would be shared by all the people who worked. Marx, Engels, and those who thought as they did had a saying: from everyone according to his ability, and to everyone according to his need. In other words, everyone would do their best at whatever they're best at for the good of the country, and everyone would share the country's wealth. Communism sounded like a good idea, but in the real world, people with money, the upper classes, used their money to try to get the people who ran the government to do what they wanted done. They did not like communist ideas. Imagine how John D. Rockefeller or Andrew Carnegie must have felt about communism. Marx and Engels had followers in both Europe and the United States. The International Workers of the World, a union that wanted to start a communist revolution in America, tried to get the working classes to throw out the government in America. Of course, many people were against them. Often called the Wobblies, their top leader, Frank Little, was murdered. In the United States, people were so afraid of communism that in the years after the First World War, the government passed laws to stop immigration so that people from Europe who might like the idea of communism would not be able to get into the United States. However, in Russia in 1917, things turned out differently. Millions of poor farmers hated the king or Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II. Russia was losing to Germany in World War I, and Russians were ready for a change. Vladimir Lenin and his followers, called Bolsheviks, took this chance to take power away from the Tsar and created the world's first communist country. To show that Russia would now be a communist country, they changed its name to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, or the Soviet Union for short. When Lenin died in 1924, the person who was second in charge took power. The new Soviet leader was Joseph Stalin, a cruel man who locked up and killed many thousands of the people of the USSR. In many ways, Stalin was just as terrible as Hitler. But during World War II, the United States was at war with Hitler's Germany, and so was Stalin's Soviet Union, which made the United States and the Soviets allies. Being on the same side, however, did not make the Soviets or the Americans think any better of each other's ideas about communism and capitalism. Americans had seen what communism was like in the real world. Lenin, Stalin, and the Soviet leaders had taken away what people owned. They had forced millions of people to give up their land and moved thousands of people to work on farms and in factories run by the government. They arrested or killed people who spoke out against the government. Communism was not the perfect system that Marx and Engels had promised. Americans did not want to become a communist country. They also did not want anyone else in the world to have to live in a communist country. Now that you know what divided the world during the Cold War, let's take a look at the specific events that were happening during World War II and how those events led to the start of the Cold War in 1945. Near the end of World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt was in his fourth term as president. One of the most important things he did at this time was to go to meetings with leaders of the other Allied countries. These meetings were so that the Allies could plan how to fight the Axis powers. By 1945, everyone could see that the Allies were winning the war, so the Allied leaders met to plan for the future. After all the terrible damage done by the war, what kind of future world would they build? The Yalta Conference in February of 1945, President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union's Joseph Stalin met. Roosevelt wanted the Soviets to help America fight Japan in the Pacific. Roosevelt also wanted Stalin to agree to join a new United Nations. Churchill wanted fair elections and democratic governments in Eastern and Central Europe. But Stalin wanted to see communists take over the governments of those countries. He thought that having communist countries around the Soviet Union would help protect his country from attack in the future. Not long after the Yalta Conference on March 29, 1945, President Roosevelt died from a stroke. People in America and around the world were shocked and very sad. They did not know that Roosevelt was not healthy. For many of the young soldiers fighting the war, Roosevelt was the only president they could remember. When the Allied leaders met again in July of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered, Hitler was dead. America's new president, Harry Truman, was about to use the nuclear bomb to end the war with Japan. The choices the leaders made at Potsdam, the Potsdam Conference, would change the map of Europe, especially for Germany. The leaders agreed that the Soviet Union would have control over Eastern Europe, just like Stalin had wanted. This included the countries of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Albania, and Bulgaria. Germany would be split into 4 zones. The Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, and France would each control one of the areas. Germany's capital city, Berlin, was inside the Soviet area or zone, but it too would be split up into 4 zones. In the years that followed, the Western Allies joined their zones together to make West Germany and the city of West Berlin. The Soviet Union, however, set up communist governments in each of the countries they had beaten in the war and created East Germany and the city of East Berlin. Like Europe, the rest of the world also saw big changes. Let's take a moment to talk about what happened around the world at this time. Since the 1800s, large areas of Africa and Asia had been run as colonies by the great countries of Europe. During the 20 years after World War II, most of these colonies asked for, fought for, or were given independence in a process called decolonization. India won its independence from the United Kingdom in 1947 under the great leader Mahatma Gandhi. In Africa, many new countries were created. The same thing happened in the Middle East. It was there that Jews from Europe who had lived through the Holocaust created the new country of Israel in the land talked about in the Bible. Most of the old colonies were very poor. For years and years, the people of Europe had taken oil, minerals, diamonds, and rubber from the colonies and given almost nothing back. Europeans hadn't spent money to make their colonies better. For example, in the Congo, a colony of 13 million people, only 16 people had a college degree when it won its independence from Belgium in 1965. Without educated people, many of these new countries had a very hard time setting up governments that could run large countries and manage their rich natural resources. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were interested in the future of these new, free, third world countries. The Soviets thought that they could spread communism there. Americans believed that these new countries would only be free if the spread of communism was stopped. Both superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, also wanted to be able to get the natural resources of the third world. Many of you have heard of the United Nations. We're going to talk now about how that organization got started. In 1918, the United States had decided not to join the League of Nations. And that world organization had not been strong enough to stop Germany and Japan from starting World War II. In 1945, many leaders thought that a stronger international organization was needed to stop wars from starting. Even though the Soviet Union and the United States had different ideas about how governments should run, the idea of countries around the world working together was an important result of World War II. Along with other things, this was because people realized that each country trying to go it alone had failed. So this new spirit of working together led to the birth of the United Nations, or UN, in 1945, with its main office in New York City. The United Nations has different groups with different jobs. One is the Security Council, which is the executive branch of the United Nations. The Security Council must say okay to any action the UN takes, such as economic sanctions, the use of military force, or the use of soldiers to keep the peace in times of war. The 5 countries that won World War II, the United States, Great Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union, now Russia, each hold a seat on the Security Council that cannot be taken away. 10 more seats are held by other countries. These are chosen by the UN General Assembly every 2 years. The 5 permanent members hold the power of veto. No action can take place unless all 5 agree. During the Cold War, the veto power of the United States and the Soviet Union often kept the Security Council from taking strong action when difficult and important decisions needed to be made. The main body of the United Nations is the General Assembly. Every country holds a seat in the General Assembly. The General Assembly has the power to give advice to the Security Council, but has no power to make the Security Council do something. The United Nations has a Secretary General who's chosen by the Security Council. He or she runs the day-to-day activities of the UN. The United Nations Charter does not say exactly what the Secretary General should do, but the people who have been Secretary General often try to help countries find peaceful solutions to their problems and to fight for human rights. It's a custom that the Secretary General is never from one of the 5 permanent member countries. Secretary Generals of the past 60 years have come from countries like Norway, Peru, South Korea, Thailand, Egypt, Ghana, and Spain. The UN does other things too. It has an International Court of Justice and helps women and children and people who have to leave their own country because of wars. It also works to end disease and the problem of not enough food in the world. For example, UNICEF and the World Health Organization were started by the UN. After his death, Franklin Roosevelt's wife Eleanor wanted the United Nations to write an international declaration of human rights. Even though it's been broken many times, the declaration that she helped to write is a noble goal for each country to try to follow. The old League of Nations failed, but the United Nations is still around today and has done many good things, including helping to keep the peace in areas where there's war, fighting disease, and helping more people in the third world learn to read. In 1945, and today as well, the United Nations gives us hope that countries in the world can get along together. The UN is far from perfect, but it does give a way for nations to live together in peace for the good of all people. Finally, today we're going to talk about an important Cold War idea, the Iron Curtain. In 1946, Winston Churchill gave a speech about how Europe and the world was starting to be divided between capitalism and communism. In the speech, he said, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere, and all are subject, in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in some cases increasing measure of control from Moscow." The Iron Curtain that Churchill talked about was both a real border and a border that a person felt in their mind, a border between the East and the West, between freedom and communism. Fences, guards with guns, and especially the Berlin Wall clearly showed how divided the world was during the Cold War. The location of the Iron Curtain was a result of how World War II ended. In the places the Americans and the British took back from Germany during the war, they helped set up new governments that had elected leaders and capitalism. This included France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Italy. This worked well because the people of those countries saw that the Allies had saved them from Germany. They did not need the Allied countries to lead them. Germany was different. There was no question that the Allies were going to stay in Germany to build it again themselves. As Truman and Stalin had planned at their meeting in Potsdam, the division of Germany into East and West was a way to share this very difficult work. This plan gave Stalin a chance to help the small German Communist Party take over in East Germany. It was the same way all across Eastern Europe. In the countries that the Soviets had taken back from Germany, the communists took over the governments. These countries included Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Albania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and East Germany. The Soviet army made the economies of these countries work like the Soviet Union. Private people did not own farms or factories where things were made, or businesses. These were all owned and run by the government. Although the Iron Curtain was a divide in the way people thought about their governments and economies, in some places you could see it. It was also the fences and soldiers along the borders between the East and the West, especially in what was called the inner German border between East and West Germany. Outside of the cities, there were fences. In the cities, high concrete walls were built. In the first 10 years after the war, people could easily travel between the East and the West. But by the end of the 1950s, that was almost impossible. After the Berlin Wall was built in 1961, people from the East were shot and killed by their own border guards if they tried to escape into the West. The division between the communist countries and the non-communist countries during the Cold War could also be found in Asia, but the words Iron Curtain were usually only used for the border in Europe. The Iron Curtain was a real border of concrete and steel and soldiers, but even more so, it was a border in the minds of people. It's like a screen that hangs halfway through a room, or one that keeps the inside and the outside apart. The Iron Curtain cut off neighbors from each other. It was like people who lived on either side of the Iron Curtain lived in two different worlds, and they no longer got along with each other and no longer trusted each other. That brings us to the end of today's lesson about the start of the Cold War. Let's finish by recapping our big ideas. The Cold War was a 50-year struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The two superpowers and their allies were trying to spread their ideas about the best way to run nations. The Soviet Union wanted to spread communism. The United States believed communism was wrong and wanted to promote a free market system. After World War II, most of the countries in Africa and Asia that had been European colonies became independent. Many of these nations were poor, and both the United States and Soviet Union tried to win them as allies during the Cold War. Sometimes this led to violence. After World War II, the United Nations was created. The UN has played an important role in the world as a way for countries to solve their problems peacefully and to help people live healthier lives. When World War II ended, the Americans, French, British, and Soviets divided up Europe into East and West. This led to a division of the continent that would last throughout the Cold War. Germany itself was divided into East and West, as was Berlin, its capital city. This division was nicknamed the Iron Curtain. Thank you. Next time, we're going to learn about how the United States and our allies tried to stop the spread of communism. I'll see you then.